But we want to quickly introduce for you a good friend of mine, Peter LaBarbera. I've gotten to know Peter. We are both Chicagoans, native Chicagoans, and I met Peter for the first time at a Christian radio station where I used to work years ago, and he was absolutely bubbling over with vim and vigor, and he still does that. He is fearless. This guy is fearless when it comes to confronting the LGBT agenda, the LGBT movement. He is the head and the president of the Americans for Truth About Homosexuality group, and he is just a lightning bolt, and he's so much fun to be around because he's just all about the truth, and he's all about the truth that Jesus can set even the most in bondage sinner free. And he is going to come with us, come in front of us now, and he's going to speak to us about Understanding LGBT Activism, a primer on tactics, manipulation, and strategies, which will be very helpful for all of us so we can recognize how this movement works. And so you will have the ability to spot some of the signs of activism if it comes up in your own church. Peter LaBarbera.
Okay, this is called From the Sublime to the Profane, after that testimony. I'll tell you, I'm just so blessed by this conference. I think there's going to be people getting saved, watching live stream. And before I get to my PowerPoint, I just want to say, what I'm struck by is how comparing this to what the gay Christians do, they're so complicated. They make everything so complicated. Janet Mefford sent me this tweet, and thanks to Paul Blair and Pastor Fisher and everybody for hosting us, and just it's wonderful. But listen to this tweet from Preston Sprinkle, who's one of the guys of this REVOICE, one of the favored sons of that movement. He says, quote, "In the process of helping a side B genderqueer biological female Christian figuring out Airbnb housing arrangements for a politically/theologically conservative (parentheses voted for Trump) closeted gay Christian male (parentheses male) pastor who's happily married to a woman. Welcome to my world." Well, why would anybody want to be part of that world? Amen. Huh? Yeah. What's up with that? I mean, side A, side B, I'm always getting them confused, so I got a way to figure it out now. Side A is practicing, which means you call yourself a gay Christian, yet you're practicing behaviors which are anathema in Scripture, okay? So I'm calling side A is for super apostate. Okay, side A is super apostate gay Christian. Side B are the ones who say, I'm celibate, but I'm calling myself an LGBTQ Christian. What's that all about? Since when do we identify by our sinful temptation? Yeah, I'm a gossiper Christian. I have my friend's a porn-using Christian, and we got a few incestuous Christians. Uh-oh, that one's way off the target. This is crazy, and I'm just saying, it's so complicated. It reminds me once my wife and I had got this magazine called Real Simple, and we dropped it when she was assistant editor or something, this lesbian and her partner were describing how they basically got a child through artificial insemination, and it was so complicated. And it was like page after page. I'm like, Real Simple? No. See, and so this is the lie, and we're talking about a revolution. And it's a revolution, but it's a revolution built on lies. Don't think this is a reform movement. Don't think this is like the civil rights movement that helped America overcome, at least a large chunk, overcome a racism in the past. What an insult to African Americans to compare minorities, so-called, based on aberrant sinful behavior, to people whose are identified by skin color. And by the way, we don't need to identify people by skin color, but what an insult. Because Black History Month, you ever have to go out and say, is he black? Right? But you do for the Gay History Month. It's like, oh, they're coming out, and it's a whole big process, and there's this Gay History Month, and they identify people as gay. I remember, I think it was Cary Grant, and like one of the wives or old girlfriends of Cary Grant's like, he wasn't gay. It's like, it's not the same. And what an insult to our African American brothers and sisters in Christ and out of Christ to make that analogy. And I want to say also here, one of my things on my sheet, I don't think we've said it yet, but Stephen Black and I were banned from the REVOICE conference. We both signed up to go, and He sent me an email saying, you're really out at odds with our purpose. Now, here's what I don't understand. So the side B is a celibate, right? Celibate. I mean, I'm not saying that, but, come on. Now, really? Some of the stuff that they're making fun of Christians? Okay, so the side B can easily associate with the side A. That's the super apostate, remember? They're the ones practicing homosexuality, calling themselves a gay Christian. They can easily associate with them, go to conferences, but they cannot associate with Stephen Black or Andrew Franklin, or they can't associate with ex-gays. They don't like that term, ex-gays. And I'm going to go through the terms a little bit, and the term's not perfect. Stephen said, I don't like to call myself ex-gay. We're fumbling for ways to try to describe, because they corrupted the language. They stole the language. They took the terms. They're trying to do everything by their terms. And so, ex-gay is not a perfect word, but guess what's the word they settle on? And I saw this I listened to an interview between Preston Sprinkle and Greg Coles, who identifies, I think, as a celibate gay Christian. And they were like, they were going through the words, and they don't like homosexual, and they didn't like ex-gay, and they didn't like gay agenda. I can't remember, but they liked the term gay. Why is that? That term itself is propaganda because it makes it sound like it's an innocuous trait. It doesn't go to behavior. Scripture talks about behavior. There's no sexual orientation in the Bible. There's no gay in the Bible. That's nuts. But yet they have hostility towards the Stephen Blacks of the world, yet they're able to associate with people, the super apostate, side A, able to associate with them, no problem. So they have a greater affinity for this LGBTQ movement, such as it is, some celibate, some not, than they do for people who unapologetically identify with Scripture. That should tell you something very important. That's right? Because they are activists. They are falling for gay ideology. And let me tell you one last thing, because this is really embarrassing for them. They settled on this thing of sexual minority in the church. Guess who came up with the idea of a sexual minority? Right here. Harry Hay was a 17-year Communist Party member in 1948. He came up with this idea of the oppressed sexual minority. So, as usual, the sort of wayward Christians are like 70 years late. They're 70 years late to the party. And I'm going to read from this book. This is Radically Gay. I was in the airport, and I was packing late my bags, and I had like Radical Gay jammed up in my suitcase. I looked down, and the guy's like going through, oh, Radical Gay. Oh, great, I do have the honor or dishonor of being falsely labeled gay more than probably anybody in America. Because for some reason, that's like the greatest insult if you're a homosexual activist. You're gay! No, I got 5 kids. I'm happily married 30 years. Leave me alone. What do I have to do? Have 5 more? I mean, come on. Okay, so here's Harry Hay, 17-year Communist Party member, and this is another guy named Chuck Rowland, who actually also was a Communist Party member. Chuck Rowland says, Hay's note, I'm reading from page 52 of this book, which is by Harry Hay. Hay's notion of gay people as a minority was still mostly a hunch when the original group of Matakeen founders, Matakeen was the first homosexual activist organization in the United States. When the original group of Matakeen founders began meeting, and this is after the war, it was their discussions that led them to develop this idea into a formal thesis. As Chuck Rowland recalled, quote, I kept saying to Harry Hay, what is our theory? Having been a communist, you've got to work with a theory. What is our basic principle that we are building on? And Harry said, quote, we are an oppressed cultural minority. And I said, that's exactly it. This was the first time I know of that gays were referred to as an oppressed cultural minority, close quote. So, REVOICE, you're late to the ball. Go back and read your ex-communist, whatever. He left the Communist Party. But, I mean, this is nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. And it just galls me. And before I forget, this is a book, Health Hazards of Homosexuality. We're not going to talk about it because lunch is coming up. It's very sobering literature. It's really hard to read. But this is the kind of stuff they don't talk about in the media. This is a book by Mass Resistance, The Health Hazards of Homosexuality. You can get it through our website, AmericansForTruth.com, and it's really useful. It's the kind of thing the media doesn't want to focus on. Okay, so let me see if I get this to work. Okay, that's, there you can get, anybody who wants, I can send them the presentation. Just email me. Okay, how did we get here? This is Drag Queen Story Hours. It's always one outrage after another outrage, and now we're at the point where we've got cross-dressing homosexual men who look like that reading Princess Boy, which you can imagine. The prince doesn't find the princess. What does he find? What does he want? He wants a prince. Real good message for kids, right? It's all about indoctrination, and it's all about activism and changing attitudes. Okay? That's where we are now. How did we get here? Remember, it's a revolution. Linda Hirschman, homosexual activist, they all talk about it as a revolution. Do most revolutions turn out well? I think isn't it like 100 million dead from communism? Remember that revolution? And if you go on college campuses, they always say, well, that's because it's really never been tried. Marxism has never really been. That's what they used to tell. I went to Michigan. That's University of Michigan, and that's what one communist guy said to me. Okay, this is from Scott Lively, the 5 stages of homosexual activism in the culture. Tolerance, the right to be left alone, is what they originally said they wanted. Then it goes to acceptance. Then it goes to celebration. We're well past that stage. We're really between 4 and 5 now. 4 is forced participation in, quote, gay, now and I put in there trans culture. Obergefell is the gay marriage decision. Obergefell v. Hodges, Sweet Cakes by Melissa. There's tons of victims now, too many to count. And number 5, punishment of dissenters, where you're actually punishing dissenters in the culture, in a free society, so-called. Next, there's Jack Phillips. He's one of them, very heroic man. He's fighting for his rights. Zero-sum game. And I really believe a lesbian activist named Kai Feldblum came up with that, but I think she's right. I don't really think rights based on our genuine rights as we understand them, rooted in God, of course, how can they survive and how can they mix with rights based on sin? Genuine rights aren't based on sinful behavior, changeable behavior, right? So how dare they say they're constitutional, natural rights? That's ridiculous. Escalating pro-LGBTQ indoctrination in schools. Here's a book. That's Harvey Milk, who's a homosexual activist, on the front page there to the left. He was a big espoused coming out. He was assassinated in San Francisco. Here's the part the kids will never learn. Harvey Milk, I think, if the age of consent in New York was 18, Harvey Milk was a statutory rapist because he had a sexual, quote, relationship with a runaway street hustler. This is from the book. That's Harvey Milk, the adult on the left. See the kid? You can see how young he is. He's 16 or possibly 17. It's Galen McKinney. This is in New York. That's in the book about Harvey Milk, which is by Randy Schultz, who's a gay journalist, homosexual, journalist. And the book's really a hagiography, so if he's saying it, it's probably worse than that. So he had this, he shacked up, as it were, with this kid who was a runaway, and it's so profane in the book I couldn't say what the kid said. He was a male prostitute, runaway. Harvey Milk was molested himself. His mother was naive enough to let him go to the theater as a boy alone in New York City. He was molested there. Then he went on, sadly, to accuse his political opponents of being, quote, child molesters. He was very promiscuous. He lured Navy guys into his apartment, so he was a predator. He was a very bad guy. But what are the kids going to be taught? They're going to be taught he's right up there with MLK, right? That's what they're going to be taught. They're going to be taught he's a civil rights. This is what they're going to be taught. And he was also a huge espouser of coming out, which is one of the key building blocks of, quote, gay power in our culture. Okay, here we are again with this crazy culture, which is just insane. Here's she-male activism. Look at the story. This is a Portland network, KATU. Look how the media, treat everything so seriously. Portland transgender man gives birth to a son. Well, he's not a man. It's a woman who's taken hormones. She's got grown facial hair. I think we're going to play the clip, but look at the media always plays it straight. The media, this is a media-fed revolution. This is a media revolution in addition to a behavioral revolution, in addition to a deviance revolution. But without the media, they're nothing. And I'll tell you what's greatest, in my opinion, Trump's greatest contribution to political culture in America? Calling out the fake news. All right. Because he did it. And he used the news's incredible bias against them to build, win election, to get power. Whereas a lot of the other, Republicans, if I'm nice enough to the media, maybe they'll like me and they'll be nice to me. No, they're never going to like us. And the media has gone full tilt pro-homosexual, pro-transgender. It's all media all the time. It's all fake news because what do they not have? They don't have the other side. None of these wonderful testimonies we've heard today, these ex-gays, these ex-transgenders, whatever you want to call them, they're not even on Fox News. Even Fox News won't touch former homosexuals. Isn't that interesting? Why is that? Well, it's based in New York City. They got Shep Smith, an open homosexual activist, too. He's anti-social conservative. Shep Smith working there. And they're afraid of it. They're afraid of it. And yet they put so-called gay conservatives like Tammy Bruce on all the time. I could tell you a story about Tammy Bruce before she was as conservative as she. Everyone know who Tammy Bruce is? She's on Fox News a lot. I'm going to tell this story because I just want to get this out. Tammy Bruce set me up when I was a young, doing this about 20 years ago it must have been. And I stupidly didn't check who the interviewer was. It was Tammy Bruce. And she said, I'll do this interview. And I had put out a press release about, I think it was Disney World or Disneyland, saying they were having a gay days. And I said, you should warn the parents because, you know, people plan their vacation. They show up at these parks. They have no idea that there's going to be thousands of homosexuals, you know, holding hands, engage in homosexual same-sex affection. And it's fair to warn the parents, right? Well, she was outraged by that. And she posed as a violent, abusive homophobe. And she tried to bait me into making violent remarks. She'd say stuff like, don't you just want to hit him sometimes? You get so mad. And I'm like, no. I'm just here for my interview. You know? And so she does this for like 20 minutes. And then she says, I've got news for you. I'm Tammy Bruce. I'm the biggest out lesbian on the West Coast. And you have 30 seconds to respond. 30 seconds. And I'm like, help me, God. And I fumbled out some words. And I said, we just have a different view. It's a moral view. Defending morality is not hate. Where did this lie come from? Right? But then I asked her for the tape. She never gave me the tape, and she never apologized. My point is not to bash Tammy Bruce. I agree with her like 95% of the time she's on Fox. But my point is this. Gay conservatives, so-called, when it comes to their besetting sin, when it comes to their special or their problem, because I believe homosexuality is a problem that God can help us with. When it comes to that, they're left-wing radicals. Always remember that. They're left-wing radicals on their particular issue. Okay? Just know that. Okay, let's play this clip here.
A transgender man from Portland, Oregon is welcoming his newborn son into the world. Let's introduce you to Tristan Reese. He gave birth to Leo 2 weeks ago. Leo is the first biological child for Reese and his husband. Reese said the road to his pregnancy was a rocky one. The last time he tried to get pregnant, he had a miscarriage. But this time around, things took a different turn.
I would say it's unique. I understand that people are not used to two men having a biological child between the two of them. So we know it's unique.
Just to like see the very first beginning of Leo, of his life was just like amazing.
Well, Reese and his husband Biff also have 2 adopted children. We'll be right back. Stay with us, everyone. Stay with us.
We're right back. There it is. That's just the news. Yeah, it's just factual. Just another man having a baby. You know, it's just the news. Fake news, fake men, fake pronouns, fake morality. Trump needs to expand the repertoire. Expand it, Trump. That's how they're trained. Okay, here's the next frontier. I got this from a website called Before You Act. Before You Act. Take that down. The letter B, the number 4, letter U, act.org. Now note here how they're describing this like an orientation. They don't call it pedophile because that word's been tarnished. What they're calling it is minor attracted persons. Quote, due to the age of the onset, presence, and sexual and romantic components and stability over time, minor attraction, that is, being sexually attracted to children, underage minors, particularly pedophilia, has been proposed as a sexual age orientation. Sexual age orientation. They're already talking about it. Finally, quote, no person should be denied their dignity and humanity because of feelings of attraction that they did not choose. Okay, here we go. What are they doing? You have no choice. This is who you are, right? Now look at this. Some experts have estimated that 0.5 to 7% of all males are attracted to minors, although there is no solid research to confirm this. So when you take down God's boundaries, the floodgates wide open. There's no stopping it. And back to that, remember that pregnant man. We saw Andrew Franklin's Wonderful Family. What a contrast, huh? God's way versus this weird weird thing. And my heart goes out to these people, but they need the Lord. They don't need to be identified as by their pervert, whatever you want to call it. Besetting sin, temptation, there's a lot of bad circumstances which we'll get into. I just wanted to show you how bad it is in Canada. This is Bill Watcott. He's a friend of mine. I actually went to Canada, and I got arrested in Canada passing out flyers with this guy. Canada is evolving into a politically correct police state. He is facing 1 to 2 years in prison for basically, he snuck into he's edgy, but he's a great guy. He's a Christian. He snuck into a gay pride parade 2016 in Toronto. He passed out, he disguised it as condoms, but they were gospel tracts. Okay, so he passed out 3,000 pamphlets warning of the physical and spiritual dangers of homosexual acts. He faces jail time, and I just interviewed him on my webcast, which we have every day at Americans for Truth, and it looks like he's likely to go to jail because he said the judges in Canada, the way he described it, they're all Kagans, and what's the other real liberal one? Sotomayor. They're all Kagan and Sotomayor or worse. There's no justice in Canada, and it's becoming a police state. Here's what he said. I love this. The abortion debate, the sodomy debate, it's all about who is your God. Let's not kid ourselves. The LGBT is a new religion, and its adherents in some cases worship their false God more zealously than we worship the living God. It's a cult, folks. It's a cult. Okay? It's a cult. And shame on us if we can't match their zeal when we have the truth. What's wrong with us? Right versus wrong. It's incredible to see how God was right. And all this was foreseen in Scripture. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Now note the good evil part. That's when you say Christians are haters. They're saying good. They're saying people working for God's morality are haters, are the equivalent of the Ku Klux Klan. That's what the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a hateful group itself, that's what the leftist Southern Poverty Law Center's position is.
We can stand together against hate.
The center also calls the Family Research Council a hate group.
The definition of a marriage is what it's been for 5,000 years. It's the union of a man and a woman.
I often disagree with the council myself, but do they belong on this hate map?
When they don't agree with you politically, they're going to list you as a hater.
You are haters. You hate gays.
No, I don't hate gay people, and I know gay people, and I have worked with gay people.
But once you're labeled a hate group, you become a target.
Developing now, word of a shooting at the Family Research Council there in Washington.
One man was so enraged by what the center said about the Family Research Council, he went to their headquarters to kill people.
A man shot the security guard in the arm.
Fortunately, that guard stopped the man before he could shoot anyone else.
He told the judge that he was there to kill as many of us as possible because we were a hate group.
The Southern Poverty Law Center now lists people like Ben Carson, Laura Ingraham, and Jeannie Pirro as extremists. But it doesn't list Antifa, the hate group that beats up people on the right. The center's become a hate group itself. It's now a left-wing, money-grabbing slander machine.
Wear it with pride because it's a lie from the pit of hell. Defending morality, defending God's values is not hate. Okay, where did it all start? Before Stonewall, this is the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, which is anti-police, the gay activist riot. Transgenders were rioting as well. They see it as the birth of the modern, quote, gay movement. Actually, I think it's the birth of the in-your-face gay movement. But before that was Kinsey. But Kinsey had a major role in mainstreaming homosexuality. He is given credit by most homosexual activists as helping to mainstream homosexuality. The problem is this guy was bad news. He used pseudoscience to make outrageous claims about American mores, and the media ate it up, He milked the media. He used the media. He was a genius with the media. He had this book called The Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, and he had the media. It's coming out next year. He uses it as a PR stunt.
I think it's a good thing. I think the more you know about anything, the better you can do it, and the better you do it, the more successful you are. The
problem is he was interviewing a lot of perverted people. This is before 1950, in the 40s, people like to talk about sex. I think there were a lot of people, regular people, in the 1940s who like to talk openly with some researcher about sex. Who thinks that? So he interviews these guys, some of the most, and one of them was Harry Hay, by the way. And he interviewed a lot of homosexual activists. He also distorted female sexuality. He distorted the number of women committing adultery because I think he called common law. He acted like that was a marriage. Because he had a sexual perversion problem himself from boyhood. And if you want to read about it, get a biography by, I think it's James Jones. Last name is Jones. He was honest enough, an honest liberal who broke the secrets about Kinsey. Look at this outrageous claim he made. 37% of American males had engaged in homosexual behavior in 1947 or whenever it was. No way. These are the lies that this guy, the entire sexual revolution was built on his lies because the media bought it hook, line, and sinker. And my question is, where were the Christians? Because wait till you see this. Okay. I'm sorry, it's before lunch. This is a table found in, I wish I'd brought it, The Sexual Behavior in the Human Male. This is table 34. He's talking about, this is child molestation. I'm not going to dwell on it, but I'm not even going to look at the scribe, but it's there. You can get it on our website. Let's move on. But the point is, his research, he used child molesters as research, and he published it as data in his book. Let me ask you this. Why is there still a Kinsey Institute at the University of Indiana? In a Me Too, we're talking about these people, actors, Harvey Weinstein, and producers, anybody who's had a sexual abusive past, they're paying the price. Why does the University of Indiana still have the Kinsey Institute? If he used child molester data and published it in his book. And another question, where were the Christians and where was the media? This is right there in the book. There's more than one table, by the way. Okay, well, this is, I think, one reason why. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. And I don't know how to explain how that table wasn't publicized and he wasn't taken down in the 40s. Maybe it was post-war stuff. Everybody was happy the war was over, but where were the Christians? Well, this is a very important quote from Evan Wilson, who was the leading homosexual so-called marriage crusader. He says, it's not just about marriage. I'm not in this just to change the law. It's about changing society. It's all about changing society in the, quote, progressive way, and it's always about the next progressive goal. How did the revolution move so far, so fast? Coming out, Kirk and Madsen talked about coming out. It's so important because it helps convert straights. That's the way Kirk and Madsen were two homosexuals who wrote a book called After the Ball. The article was called Overhauling Straight America. And it was all about changing attitudes. And it's very manipulative, but it worked. Lies and propaganda, the 10% lie, remember that one? 10% of the culture of the population is, quote, gay. Wasn't true, was made up by a gay activist. It exaggerated their power. Born gay. I have one on there. Born gay, no gay gene. Lisa Diamond is a lesbian, or I don't know how she did it. Maybe she's bisexual. She once identified as a lesbian. Not sure if she still does. Top researcher with the American Psychological Association, and she said that sexual orientation is fluid and not unchangeable. More and more, that's what even homosexuals are saying, but a lot of people still go by the lie that it's rigid. And it seems to me that the REVOICE guys are kind of stoking that rigid sexuality thing. Well, what about this woman? Let's go back there. Okay, words. Words are key. Pray away the gay. Don't use that. That's mocking Christians, basically. It's basically saying people like Stephen and Andrew and Laura, oh, they're praying away the gay. And it's all designed, I think it was made up by Wayne Besson, who's a very evil homosexual activist. I think he made that up. But these are the kind of, and the media has actually used that phrase, pray away the gay, making fun of us. It's the world. Marriage equality, it's not equal. two people of the same sex cannot produce a child on their own. It's not equal. Inclusion, diversity, what are you talking about? They're trying to silence ex-gays. They hate ex-gays. Believe me, they're first going after the children, the minor, reparative therapy oriented towards kids. Now imagine if you had a son, your parents, you have a son who, like Harvey Milk, was molested by a homosexual when he was, 10 or whatever age he was. Imagine, you want to take him to a therapist who, I don't want my son to think he's homosexual just because he was the victim of a homosexual predator. In many states now, you couldn't do that because you can't go to a non-gay affirming or a, heterosexual affirming. You can't basically violate gay ideology. And after that, they're going to go to adults. And so they're not diverse. They're not intellectually diverse. They don't believe in inclusion. That's a lie. Coming out of the closet, really, it makes it sound like it's coming into light. We just heard from Laura, there wasn't much light there. It was more like covering into darkness. So all the terms are twisted. And you can't really have a fair debate, which is why I think we have to try to resist using their language. I don't like this one, who you are. It's not who you are, it's who you aren't, right? How did they get the idea that embracing an unnatural sexual identity is who you are? And let me read this quote from Michelangelo. He also goes by Mike Signorelli, big-time homosexual activist. This is written in 1995, and the title is How to Come Out as Lesbian or Gay to Your Family, Friends, and Coworkers, but he should have put in there and come out to yourself, because listen to this on page 8. He's talking about one of his exercises is mirror, mirror. He says, go to your bathroom mirror. Pick a time when you know there's no one around and when you know for sure that no one will walk in on you or hear you. Run the water in the sink. If you want to be really sure no one will hear you, look at yourself in the mirror and study your face. Take a few minutes to get to know yourself and your face in the mirror. Feel good about how this person who is taking charge of himself or herself. And when you are ready, say softly and sweetly, quote, I am gay or I am a lesbian. Say it slowly, over and over again, no matter how painful it is, no matter if it makes you cry, blah, blah, blah. Then he has exercise 2, go out to a park or the woods and say, I am gay, I am gay, I am gay. Or he says, write it in a column, write it on one side. I mean, all these exercises to persuade yourself that this is who you are. Well, the reason you have to do those exercises is because it's not who you are. And the worst thing you can do to an openly homosexual person is confirm them in an aberrant identity. And shame on REVOICE if they're upset at the ex-gays and they don't want Stephen Black around, because if you're denying people leaving the homosexual, some call it a death style, some call it a lifestyle, if you're denying that, then what are you denying? You're denying Jesus' power to change people. I don't want to be in that boat. And they're rigid on that. They don't like it because they are embracing that identity, that false identity. Shame on them. Assigned male, okay, that's, used to be, hey, you have a baby girl, you have a baby boy. Now it's, he was assigned male, assigned female. That's what they want the doctors to say now. I mean, this is an evil movement. Cisgender, so now the normal people, if I can dare say that, you have to give a word for them to identify them. See how everything is upside down? So I'm assuming that most of you here are cisgender. Isn't that strange? You have to have a name for what is natural and normal? Isn't that weird? Homophobe, transphobe, okay, that's irrational fear. Phobic, to disagree is not to have irrational fear. And that term has been elastic. It's really expanded. It's a made-up word. I think George Weinberg, I think his name was, made it up. A leftist guy in the mental health industry, psychologist, I think. He made it up. And what was the purpose? To demonize people of faith, demonize traditional Christians, traditionally moral-minded people, call them homophobes, and look how quickly transphobe has been picked up by the media. Do you notice how rapidly the media mainstreams their words? The media is part of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer movement. Just accept it, and we got to call out the fake news like Trump, and we got to do it aggressively like Trump did, because they hate that. He called them out. The jig is up. People are onto it now. the next election, you think the people are going to be they're not going to care. Who reads Time magazine anymore? I mean, does anybody look, wow, Time magazine said this, I'm not worried. They're becoming irrelevant. Okay, this is Stonewall. This is the in-your-face gay revolution. This is called a ZAP. Homosexual activists would get out there and they'd start, what about the homosexuals? What about the homosexuals? Now, isn't that interesting? They were using the word homosexuals back then. Now they hate that word. And they would get in the face. This guy's a politician, I think a councilman or something, and they'd start yelling at him. And what would happen is, this is really interesting, and they would do this at talk shows too. Let's say this is a TV show or talk show. They have homosexual activists planted in the audience. But they'd be doing the show, and then they would pop up in the audience and start screaming, disrupting the show. Well, what would the media do after that? They'd say, hey, you want to come do an interview? In other words, like spoiled children, the media would reward them for their patently indecent and unfair behavior. They would reward the homosexual activists every step of the way, and they continue right to this day. Okay? No gay gene. We already did that. Okay? And I think probably half the country still believes people are, quote, born gay. And of course the transgender activists now, oh, you're born trans. Just all propaganda. Self-rationalization. I really think this is the core of understanding the LGBTQ cult. It's all about rationalizing your sin. And so the history, there's really only, what kind of history is only one side? Would you want to read a book, A History of Abortion Politics by Gloria Steinem? Of course not. But every single book, every single history book, all the textbooks, the ones the little kids are going to get in school when they start passing these, which they just did in New Jersey, they're trying to do in Illinois, teaching gay, so-called gay LGBT history, they're all going to get one-sided history from people who have a vested, desperate interest in rationalizing their own sin, bottom line, right? It's not fair. It's not right. That's what they do. We have to be the answer. We have to rise up a truth movement that fights this. And one of the things I'm worried about is there's a huge young pro-life movement, but there's not a lot of kids who get this issue. And so one thing you can do, we have a lot of bad news here, one thing you can do is educate children wherever you encounter them. Teach them the basic truths. Teach them to combat this. You can use evil for good. You can teach them, no, this is not right. Bring an ex-gay. Invite Stephen to your school. Even if you don't have kids at the school, invite him. Invite Laura. Come on. We can do this. Satan's talking points. This is now mainstream in gay Christian so-called culture. This happened a number of years ago, 2007. Harry Knox in a debate with Matt Barber, who's a great American. He founded Barbed Wire newsletter, or the website. He was in a debate with Harry Knox, who at the time was HRC's, like his religion, they're like religion guy. Human Rights Campaign is HRC, the leading homosexual activist group. Very, very powerful, very influential in Washington, D.C. and across the country. What did he say? Okay, listen to this. Talk about Isaiah 5:20 in action. It's right here.
Lisa, what's clear from our experience and from science is that being gay or lesbian is an immutable, unchangeable gift from God. One for which I'm very grateful. And it would fly in the face of my respect for God to give that gift back. It would simply be unethical.
And it would fly in the face of my respect for God to give that gift back. In other words, become ex-gay. It would simply be unethical and hurtful to our relationship with the Creator to give back gifts that God has given us. Have you ever seen anything that evil? They took everything that's good and they made it bad. They flipped evil for good. Homosexuality is the gift. Opposing it is a sin. It's returning what God is giving to you. This is utter upside down thinking. This is what they're talking about. This is why Janet and Tom Littleton and Stephen rose up. And that's why we're doing this, because Christians are the last bastion of opposition, faithful Christians to this insanity. Time's up. I just want to say our calling, I think, is to be as zealous for the truth as this fanatical movement is for the lies. And I don't buy the idea among some in the ministry movement that you can't be a ministry-minded and also stand for truth in the culture war. Is that in some Bible somewhere? You can't stand for truth in the culture if you're going to do ministry. No. Stephen Black does it. He does it. And you can do both. That's what we're called to do. We are citizens in the greatest country that God, I think, ever made. The miraculous founding that God, and it's wasting away because this revolution, this gay revolution becomes trans revolution, and now it's a pansexual revolution. Underscore, insert whatever perversion is next. This revolution means business, and we haven't meant business. And they played the psychiatrist. I think I actually, I did miss some of my thing here. Okay, but this will be the last thing, I promise, Janet. Okay. Oh, that's Don Lemon, and he was molested as a child. His mother was in an adulterous relationship. Don Lemon, anchor from CNN. I said there's always a backstory. David Pickup, I think, would confirm that. There's always a backstory. But yet he's celebrated as a gay hero, right? What about the predation he experienced when he was 5 years old at the hands of a teenage boy in the neighborhood? What about his mother was with some married guy sleeping in an apartment and there's some weird thing there? There's dysfunction. We need to pray for these people, and we have to be sympathetic. We don't want to give 1 inch to their agenda, but we want to reach out with love and truth. And this is the thing I wanted to get to really quick. The activism that you're seeing, and Tom talked about it, this checklist. The whole history of this movement is incremental. It's an incremental revolution, right? Little by little. There was a time when civil unions was really controversial. Now, if you're a Democrat, or increasingly a Republican, you say, well, I'm for civil unions, but not for gay marriage. The Democrats would throw you out. You wouldn't have a chance. That's how far gone the Democratic Party is. The Republican Party is being worked on big time by the gay conservative activists who aren't really that conservative when it comes to their sin, right? Well, look at this. This is a lesson what I think lies ahead in this REVOICE thing. Who's doing is it Albury? Who's the one doing the church checklist? Albury. Okay, they're going to set up a checklist. You got to be welcoming to LGBTQ, and it sounds good, but you know where it's going to go? It's going to become more radical because it always becomes more radical when you don't have truth as your foundation. This is the Human Rights Campaign corporate scorecard. This is 2016. Now, these guys make Jesse Jackson look like a piker. The way they manipulated corporations. What they do is they give a ranking. They have 10 criteria. And the criteria always change. And guess what? The criteria get more radical every 2 years. So what they do is they want to lock the corporations into 100% ranking, 100% pro-LGBT. And when you do that, you get this little sticker thing. You get this. So look for that. That's the Human Rights Campaign logo. Equal. It's not equal, of course. It's unequal. But anyways, I call them the Human Wrongs Campaign. There's their 100% ranking, okay? Now, what do you have to do to get that ranking? Well, here's one of them. Transgender inclusive health care insurance coverage, 10 points. You get 10 points on point 2C there in the Corporate Equality Index, CEI. You have to have equality health care coverage. You have to have benefits. You have to including services for, quote, medically necessary services related to sex affirmation / reassignment. Translation, these awful body disfiguring surgeries that Laura was talking about, they want them funded, and the corporations, to get that 100% ranking, they got to do it, right? If they don't do it, they might get a 95 instead of 100. I think Walmart at one point was 100, was 95. Walmart, did you know Walmart is now a 100% corporation? Did you know that? Who knew that? Walmart. Coverage for reconstructive surgical procedures related to sex reassignment. Dollar maximums must meet or exceed $75,000. They want to give minimum $75,000 for these awful body disfiguring surgeries. Criterion 5, here's the last thing. If you're a corporation and you give to a pro-family group, let's say there was a company in Oklahoma and said, you know what, I've seen First Stone Ministries. They're amazing. I'm going to give Stephen Black, I'm going to give him $10,000. If the homosexual lobby got wind that Stephen Black and First Stone Ministries were given $10,000 by XYZ Corporation, that corporation would lose 25 points in the ranking system, as opposed if they gave it to a pro-homosexual group. So what's happening? All these corporations already have the 100% ranking. It's blackmail. They got the 100% ranking. They want to keep it. And so what does HRC do? Every couple of years, they ratchet up the criteria. And so that's why now they have it where you get more points if you give these huge gifts to one of the thing is giving gifts to the LGBT movement. They're giving $500,000 grants to gay pride celebrations, to homosexual activist groups, to transgender groups. But if they were to give to a pro-family group, it's over, they lose points. It's a rigged system, it's bogus, and yet all these corporations brag about it. And guess what? Another thing that Human Rights Campaign is promoting in the corporate world, endorsing the Equality Act, which I'm calling the Criminalized Christianity Act, criminalizing Christianity, because that's what it's going to do, because it really negates our religious liberty. That's what you got to do to get this. And so, do you think that this scorecard, that these REVOICE guys who banned Stephen and me, we couldn't go. I was just going to go there to see what they're doing. But no. But they'll go work with the side A apostates. A for apostasy. I like that, I'm sorry. They're going to ratchet up. If I were to bet, I'm not a betting person, I bet $1,000. Tom, you probably agree. Those are not going to stay. In fact, Tom Littleton had an effect, and Janet had an effect in actually catching him on something, right? It was in that, yeah. So they're sort of feeling their way. There was a time when a lot of companies weren't 100%. Guess what? Now there are hundreds. I don't know the exact figure. Hundreds of corporations are 100%, and every 2 years they're stuck unless they give it up. You know, I went to a gay pride parade in New York City, Walmart. It was the first one Walmart, one of the ones that, I think the initial one, that Walmart sponsored. They celebrated sadomasochism. There was a sadomasochist float. There was nudity in the parade. There were people with the F word walking down the street with tons of little kids. Lots of little children go to these pride parades. This is gay parenting, quote unquote. They're redefining even what's appropriate for children. Obviously, because they think it's okay to tell a 10-year-old boy that he's a girl. We can't put up with this. We cannot settle for this. And if your pastor or your spiritual leader where you are can't muster up the courage not to cut, if he's copping out of this fight, as so many people do, find a way to cop out, then confront him and say, you've got to speak up, because if the Christians don't speak up, who will? And always remember, we have to speak up because it's not our truth, it's God's truth, and we have to defend it. Thank you.